best prices are not online. They're with SmartFares. See, SmartFares has special deals with the airlines. When they have unsold seats, they use SmartFares to fill them. So you get airline tickets at ridiculously low prices. Our prices are too low to publish online. With the extra money you'll save, you can book another trip or treat yourself to dinner or shopping. So stop searching all of those travel sites to find the lowest price on your next flight. Let one of our SmartFares expert travel agents find ridiculously low prices for you. Call SmartFares today and get the best price on your next flight. Guaranteed. Also, save up to 50% off business and first class tickets.
855-325-1820. 855-325-1820. That's 855-325-1820.
Have you ever met a single person in your life that enjoys paying taxes? No one does. If you can't sleep at night because you have a huge problem with the IRS, I've got some free advice for you. This service is strictly limited to individuals that owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes. And if you qualify, we can guarantee that you won't be writing a big fat check to the IRS, or our services cost you nothing. The first 100 people that call today will get a free tax consultation worth $500. Stop worrying about your IRS problem. We can help you, we promise. Call the tax doctor right now. I mean right now, to learn more.
800-240-4587. 800-240-4587. 800-240-4587. That's 800-240-4587.
Let's be honest. Wheelchairs are heavy, bulky, and ugly. Introducing the Feather Chair Wheelchair. Order yours today and get a free wheelchair case, a $50 value. The world's lightest wheelchair is just $4.99 with easy payments as low as $16 a month. Sorry, no Medicare or insurance accepted. So call right now to order yours.
800-823-5826. That's 800-823-5826.
Why have thousands of aspiring authors teamed up with Christian Faith Publishing to publish their book? Because Christian Faith Publishing is an author-friendly publisher who understands that your labor is more than just a book. We provide authors freedom and flexibility throughout the publishing process, professional book editing, award-winning design, and some of the highest royalty structures in the publishing industry. And as always, you will retain 100% of the rights to your book.
I was looking to find a company that I could trust, one that assisted in the editing process completely.
The most important qualities that I was looking for was a publisher who was honest and upfront, no hidden costs or fees, and owning the rights to my own work.
Christian Faith Publishing will publish, market, and sell your books in all major bookstores, online booksellers, as well as specialty Christian bookstores. Call for your free author submission kit.
800-978-4812. 800-978-4812. 800-978-4812. That's 800-978-4812.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395.
You're listening to Joco Community Radio.
Well, good afternoon, Johnson County. Welcome back to today's episode of Let Freedom Ring. I'm your host, Jake Wernette. We want to thank everybody for joining us on this wonderful Tuesday afternoon. We are blessed to have the sunshine finally back after what seemed to be London weather for a good month and a half there, which about 3 days worth of rain. We're here with special guest Brandon Hall, who was recently elected to the State Board of Education, place 11. I want to thank him for joining us. For those of you listening out there, this was a very rough cycle. There were a lot of candidates running for office in the state, federal, and as well as the local level, many of whom we have had on the show, many of whom we have not. And that kind of boils down to timing and stuff like that. Plays a big part in how many folks we can have on, whether we can ask enough questions. which today is going to be a little different. I had been to a few events and kind of taken questions from citizens um, that were submitted to me, whether in person or were texted over to me by people that I had met at events. So these are questions from constituents that we're going to be asking today. Which this might be something, if you guys like this, we can do this with candidates that we bring in next cycle. I know that we had done this with several congressional candidates. Matthew Lucci had taken live questions. We had one caller call in with a question on the abortion policy, which was a pretty interesting debate to watch. But Brandon, it's good to have you on. Would you mind telling the viewers, the listeners, a little bit about yourself? What brought you into politics and why you decided to get involved this cycle?
Yeah, thanks, Jake. I really appreciate it. It's great to be on here with you. And I am the Republican nominee for State Board of Education District 11, not elected yet until after November. It's a very conservative district, so we're pretty confident in November. But it's an honor to have been elected and chosen by the Republican primary voters there. So I live in Parker County and in Weatherford, and I pastor a church in Springtown also, which is little town out there in Parker County as well. And I've actually been involved in politics since the Tea Party movement started. And that's kind of where I got my start. Obviously a lot of people were, including myself and my family, very concerned about.
Which I know the Tea Party was kind of big here in Burleson for a few years. And then the Republican Party kind of eventually absorbed them up. But was that kind of the case with you getting involved firsthand? It kind of switched, or did you see a cycle in it? Or
there's a cycle. It's a grassroots movement, so grassroots movements kind of come in and out, and responding to what's going on in the current events. But I think the spirit of the Tea Party is still very much alive, and I think we saw the grassroots roar on primary night here recently. So but that was kind of where I got my start. And just you saw how bad everything got with Obama in office, and just the government growing immensely, and his agenda that was super concerning. So I was 13 years old actually at that time, and I started giving speeches at Tea Party rallies, traveling to different Tea Parties, and just got really involved. And then from there I kind of noticed, well, we're doing everything we can, we have a loud voice, we're holding signs, we're doing all these things, but instead of just yelling at these politicians who aren't listening to us, we should actually go replace them. And so it was that following election cycle in 2010 where I started, volunteering for conservative candidates, and kind of did that all through high school. And then, also in Bible college. So I surrendered my life to the ministry when I was a young person, and then went to Bible college and actually worked my way through Bible college, working on different campaigns, for conservative candidates. And that's kind of where I got my political start. And then,
so you majored in theology or something along that line?
Yeah, pastoral theology. Yep.
Okay. And how did that impact kind of the way that you saw politics? Did you kind of see it as more of a spiritual battle, or did you see it more of along the ethical lens? Like, Christian morals play a big part in politics, at least here in the South. That's the way that we see things. How did that impact the way that you saw politics?
I think it's both. I think ultimately, as a Christian, I know that the whole thing is a spiritual battle. And so that plays a big role in it. And then I think if you look at, what's going on as Christians, we have a duty and responsibility to stand up when, with abortion and with these different issues. And especially, in my most recent race, when we see, being on the State Board of Education, we see the cultural Marxism and just the lack of values that are the values that are going out of our schools, and they're bringing in all of the woke ideology in its place. I mean, you cannot stay silent. You can't sit on the sidelines. And that was what the decision my wife and I made this election cycle.
So would you like to get into the questions, or would you like to? So the first one that somebody had asked me to present to you was, what experience do you have in either educational or professional field that qualifies you to be on the State Board of Education?
Yeah. So great question. I think there's a couple different experiences. One of the things when I was looking at this race that I noticed is I feel like that, some of the teachers associations and teachers unions and school boards and things like that had lots of representation on the State Board of Education. But what I saw with, in Texas, there's a lot of things going on in our schools that most people would not even know. That's, people would be shocked to find this stuff out. And it's like, why is this happening? And what I boiled it down to is that parents did not have enough representation on the State Board of Education. So what I really ran to represent, of course, I'm not an educator, never have been.
Yeah.
And I'm a pastor, but what I ran to represent is the interests of parents. And I feel like that the experience of being a pastor, I've worked in youth ministry, in Parker County and even in some inner cities. And so I think that experience has been good, just working with
kind of
youth.
allowed you to look into how young people think
Yeah.
and what families want.
Exactly. Yeah. The struggles they're going through. And then being a pastor, I'll have families come and talk to me and say, hey, this is what my, kid heard in the classroom or, things like that. So I think I'm very in touch with that. And I think as a pastor, it gives you the experience to be able to listen. And so that's what I'm going to be doing with parents. I think the other, another piece of experience that I have that will be valuable to this, and it's one of the reasons I got involved as well, is in college, I got involved in a ministry. So the college I went to was in the Chicago area. It was actually in Northwest Indiana, just right outside of Chicago. And they had an inner city ministry. And one of the aspects of their ministry that I got really involved in is they had a Christian school that was for inner city kids. So when we started working with these kids, they're in schools that are full of drugs and gangs and violence. Yeah. Just really, really tough time there. And they're not getting a good education at all in those places. And so I saw, when we would work with them, and a lot of them are single moms, work with the family to get the kids enrolled in our Christian school and see, over the years, how that's impacted them. It's been life-changing for most of them, to be taken out of that bad environment and be given a good education in an uplifting environment. And so I've seen that, kind of the long-term effects from that. So I just really believe in putting parents in charge, putting them in the driver's seat, and in fixing some of the problems in our education system. And then I think the final part of my experience that I would say, I mentioned that I've been in politics for quite a while, in addition to ministry. I served as an official staffer for the U.S. House of Representatives under a Freedom Caucus member of Congress. And so I worked there on policy. I worked a lot on border policy and things like that. But I think that policy experience is also going to really help me going into the State Board of Education. I'll be able to hit the ground running. Obviously, I have a lot to learn, and I'm, leaning on education experts that are very conservative, former teachers, current teachers, to really bring me up to speed on a lot of these things. But we're going to work real hard in the next year and hit the ground running in January.
So another question that I had gotten from somebody in the district was involving, and I'm sure the struggle between having to run a campaign, being able to have the grassroots movement kind of build up. Working with Matthew Lucci as somebody that had hosted events for him, contributions was a big thing to grassroots movements, and we can't afford to get those candidates elected without having it. But we kind of run the risk of having good people labeled as bad individuals simply because they might have somebody that really likes them and wants to support them. And that kind of gives an unfair image of somebody that wants to do good change for the state of Texas. So the next question, with that in mind, is somebody said, I'd looked through and noticed that Texans for Educational Freedom had supported your campaign. They said, are you funded by big money donors? Why should I trust you to run my district? Essentially is the question. So do you want to kind of answer, why should whoever submitted this question trust you for State Board of Education?
Well, I think it's, I'll give you an interesting answer to this question. I would say you should never fully trust any politician, right? You hold them accountable and you see what they're going to do when they get in office.
Yeah.
And if after 4 years of serving on the State Board of Education, I have not proven myself that I am, my only special interest group will be parents and taxpayers, then, throw me out. That's what you should do with any politician. The other thing I would say to that is, of course, Texans for Educational Freedom did play big in this race.
Yeah.
And I think it just really shows you that, there's a lot of people out there that in Texans for Educational Freedom, they're big on parental rights and fighting a lot of the,
which I had went onto the website. I thought the anti-communism thing was a big thing that I kind of agreed on. It's not something that we want in our schools. It's not something that we want being shoved down our kids' throats. Kind of turning the kids cultural Marxist.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I just think that our values aligned. They saw somebody in my candidacy that was really going to represent that, getting that stuff out of the schools and representing parents. And so I think ultimately that's why we got their support. Campaigns are very expensive, cost money to get your message out. a lot of people don't know our district is around 2 million people in population, so
For the state board district?
yes. Yeah,
Wow.
it's huge. So 6 counties. I mean, it's very expensive to get your message out to, hundreds of thousands of voters. And so, when people support you, and if I'll tell you one thing, there are donors that I would not take money from. If any of the teachers unions, especially, that had ties to the big national woke teachers unions, I would say, I would rip that check up or send it back to them. One of the two. There's definitely people that I would not take money from. But if you're a conservative who wants to put parents back in charge and get the woke ideologies out of our schools,
It's
and
the
you wanna
right thing to do.
yeah, you want to partner with me to do that, I'll be there for you. The only person that I'm going to represent when I get in office is the parents, and my Christian conservative values. I don't care how much money anybody's given to me. If they try to get me to compromise those principles, they're going to learn a hard lesson that that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is that there was big money played in this race on both sides. I think at the end of the day, we wound up outspending our opponent, but she had taken big checks as well from Charles Butt and Dick Weekly, and a lot of really big donors, and some who, like Charles Butt, who through his HEB foundation has sponsored drag shows and things like that. So there was big money on both sides. I think we did wind up outspending her, but
I work for the company. I'm not going to say too much, but I'll say, if people can wear flag pins on their badges, then I had no problem putting a cross pin on mine. So, if somebody can sue to the Supreme Court over that, then, just try and take my religious freedom to do that away.
Yeah. Do you have any problems with that?
Not at all.
Good.
And then they took the flag pins off after Pride Month was over, and I left mine on year round, and it stays on there.
Well, good.
So I can understand the concern over the corporations kind of wanting to steer things in their own direction. That's not somewhere that we want our schools to go either.
Yeah.
Somebody said, being from a different generation than Pat Hardy, what do you think idealistically enables you to replace her as the nominee for State Board of Education representative?
Well, I think being from a different generation is a good thing. And, one of the assets that I have in this race is my youth, because I haven't been, out of the school system for really that long.
Yeah.
I started out in Texas public schools in Springtown ISD and elementary. And, I think I'm very in touch with what students are struggling with today and not generations ago. And I think that's a struggle for anybody. The older you get, it's harder to stay in touch with what the youth are up to. I face that challenge working in youth ministry. The phrases they use and things like that change all the time. So you have to really try to stay up with it. But I think I'm a lot more in touch with what's going on today.
Which I think it's a problem with the national level politics now too. You have people like Joe Biden that are 4 generations from the guy who just turned 18 and went and voted. And
yeah,
how's he supposed to know what the concerns of the young guy are if he's been in politics for 50 years?
Yeah. And I mean, you can, if you're a really good listener and you devote yourself to do that, but it's a little bit easier from somebody a little closer to that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's actually going to be a good asset. I think that I understand what we're up against. And I think that gives me a sense of urgency, because the left has stated their goal to indoctrinate our kids and to fill our schools with these woke ideologies. And so you have to understand, the enemy and what we're up against to know what we need to do.
Yeah. So the next question, matter of fact, came from somebody who had wanted to ask you on your pastoral career. They said, when I had attended a forum that you had spoken at, you told me that you were a pastor. What experience do you have as a pastor, and how do you think that qualifies you for representing a larger population than a church?
Yeah. I mean, I think pastors are good voices to have in these arenas. Like I said, I think it's great to have, some educators on the State Board of Education. I mean, even, a number of them is good because they understand really well what's going on in the classroom, but you need various perspectives. And I think that sometimes when you're in the profession, you might miss some things that parents are really concerned about, and I think as a pastor, like I've already said before, that I'm very in touch with that. My experience as a pastor is I've been working in ministry, either part-time or full-time, since I was 18. And, I talked about getting really involved with inner city ministry in Chicago, and that's where it kind of started. That was more working with youth. And then I was a youth pastor in Parker County for a year. And then I've been a pastor, just started at my church here the last year.
So congratulations on
Yeah.
the new job. Have you enjoyed it so far? What's kind of been the biggest, I guess, the biggest optimism with starting that?
It's really, really rewarding, and to be able to be there with people for their best days, for their worst days, and just really be able to pour in people and of course serve the Lord. I really
Yeah.
feel like that everything that I'm doing is worthwhile, and it's been extremely rewarding, and I really enjoy it. It's the best job in the world.
I grew up wanting to be a pastor, and then I got into politics, and I don't know how I made the change from going to somebody who's serving God to somebody who is supposed to be serving God, but kind of taking money on the side. And you look at the way federal politics has gone. I think good people are given a bad name by the system that we've had for generations now. Um, but it's good to have people that are willing to put in the fight and willing to kind of stand up for what needs to be done instead of kind of cowering down or either being scared. And um, many people I think are scared of getting involved in politics because they just don't know where to start. Um, would you have any word of wisdom before we go on to the next question for the people that might be scared to get involved, both as a pastor and as somebody who's the nominee for state board? What would you give them as advice?
Yeah, so for somebody who's, kind of sitting on the sidelines and wondering whether or not they should jump in,
Yeah,
I mean, the advice is just jump in, wherever you can. And I don't think that we really have the choice of sitting it out at this point. Unfortunately, I think that, it's saving our country is very urgent.
yeah,
I think that this is a critical time for America and for Texas. And we need good, solid conservatives and good Christians to be involved in our government. I think that's why we see a lot of the problems that we have
yeah,
is because Christians somewhere along the line got this idea that we were supposed to sit out of the process. I think we let the left tell us that's what we were supposed to do. And so somewhere along the line, we started sitting out of the process. And what would you expect to happen? With the absence of good, godly Christian people
yeah,
in the political process. I mean, that's where we've seen America kind of go off the rails. So, I mean,
yeah.
if anybody's out there kind of sitting on the sidelines wondering whether or not they should jump in, I would say, yeah, jump in. We need your help.
So another person who has been involved in education for many years in the district said your predecessor took 200 to 300 calls a month from people that they knew and the district officials, um, and answered them readily and was accessible and helping with problems. Are you ready to take up the challenge of being accessible and transparent in helping the concerns from your voters?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the job that, I'm signing up for here is to be accessible to the constituents. And so, yeah, I look forward to, putting my phone number out there, taking calls from people,
Yeah.
everybody from school board members, school administrators, all the way to parents and just concerned individuals, taxpayers, even. So yeah, I know that's a big part of the job and I know that's very time consuming, but that's something that I'm dedicated to and ready to get started on. And actually, I would say that I already have obviously had a lot of school board members
Yeah.
and parents and things reaching out to me
I
since the
know
primary.
we discussed before the show and before the Lone Star Patriots Forum back a month ago, I think it was about that you had actually went up to Fort Worth ISD um, to go kind of talk to parents and stuff about one of the agendas that the school was putting through. Would you like to kind of tell folks how you've been involved with districts so far?
Yeah, I mean, really during the campaign, living in Parker County, there's a ton of school districts in SBOE 11. So I'd been
Yeah.
involved in all of them, of course. In Fort Worth, they were voting on this specific instance that you're talking about. I think that was back in February. I don't know if it was in March yet or not, but it was, they were voting on a new health curriculum, choosing the
Yeah.
best, which is an abstinence leaning sex education and stuff in that, which, we really supported. And so we went out to that school board meeting to support that. And we were coming in from another event. So we wound up missing public comment. I'd hope to be able to speak on that. But yeah, that's something that I'm going to continue on the State Board of Education. I'm going to stay very involved in what's going on in the local school districts and, really push for excellence in education, making sure our
Yeah.
kids are getting the education they deserve and getting those woke ideologies out of there. So yeah.
Which I think that's something important too. The parents like seeing public officials show up and be able to listen. That's not something that, I've seen a lot of folks from the state come out and do. They don't really play a hand in it. You kind of see the governor get out when there's key races that he wants people to win. But You don't really see like high powered people kind of come down to the local level much, if any. Um, so the next person asked, how do you plan to use your office to fix the education system, and what is your day one plan of action?
Well, I think there's a number of things. First of all, from day one of the first things that the SBOE is going to take up in this next after the election will be in November. So starting the new term in January will be the revision of the social studies TEKS.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be a big priority day one. Making sure we really comb through those TEKS and all of the critical race theory, things like that are out, that we're teaching American exceptionalism, what a great country we live in, our founding documents, things like that. And so that's going to be a huge priority.
Yeah.
Kind of from day one. The other things I think that's a big priority for me is the library standards. We have seen a concerning, just a ton of books that have been very concerning, even in small rural school districts.
Yeah.
Think graphic novels like genderqueer that are just explicit and filthy and obscene. And, some schools are weeding these books out. And of course, with HB 900 passing, to take care of that to where it's illegal, that's great.
Yeah.
And so some schools are starting to weed them out, but it needs to happen like yesterday. And so that's going to be a big priority of mine, and making sure that those library standards are specific enough that schools cannot skirt them.
Yeah.
And even expanding them to things like, a book in Denton ISD called Jacob's New Dress, about a little boy that starts dressing in girls' clothing. And, it's a very indoctrinating children's picture book that was found in one of their elementary schools. A mom was extremely concerned about it. She took it to the school board, and they voted 6-1 to keep the book in, which is just insane. And so I think, that stuff needs to be stopped at the state level. And so that's one of the big things that I want to tackle.
I'd expect that from Target, but I wouldn't expect that from people who are supposed to be held accountable to the voters. We don't really want that stuff in the schools.
Yeah. Well, and what does Jacob's New Dress have to do with education? Schools, we really need to get back to the basics. Schools are to educate our children, not to indoctrinate them. And so that nonsense belongs nowhere near a school.
Yeah. So if you had to say one thing to your former opponent, Pat Hardy, and to the voters who may not have voted for you, what would it be?
Well, the number one thing that I would say is that you may not have supported me in the election, and that's fine. But my goal is really to give our kids a good education, and that's free from any of these other distractions. And I think that, with seeing that Texas is ranked 40th in the nation in education, I mean, our public school system is really failing our children. And so I want to go get to work on that. I think that's what our children deserve. And so I would ask them to work with me. I would ask them to pray for me. I would ask for their advice. And if they don't do it for my sake, I would say do it for the sake of the children that, deserve a really good education.
Yeah. So in the roughly 2.5 minutes that we have left, I'm going to save the rest of them for the second half. I kind of want to ask you a little bit, how is this cycle for you? Is there things that you kind of picked up that you didn't expect from parents? Stuff that you might have learned that you didn't really, know what's going on. Like you said, the books, parents don't know that this stuff's going on until the kids bring it home.
Yeah.
What's one thing that's kind of stuck with you this campaign?
I think what you mentioned, I didn't realize how pervasive the problem is. I don't think most people do. And I think, especially like I live in a very conservative community in Weatherford, and most of North Texas, and certainly my whole district is like pretty conservative. So it is surprising to see a lot of these things. And, you can find just examples almost every day of this stuff going on in the schools. I was surprised at just how bad it was. There's a lot of gaslighting when you run for a seat like mine, where people will be like, no, everything's great. Everything's wonderful. Just keep it the way it is. And then you really get into it and you're like, no, not at all. So that was a little surprising. There was one issue that came up during the campaign that, I knew it was a problem, but I just didn't realize how much I was going to hear about it from parents, and that was bullying. Bullying is a huge issue in our schools, and I just almost every event I would go to during the campaign, I would have at least one parent come up and talk to me about it. So I think that's one thing that's really been put on my radar that we need to address as well.
And I know people have kind of touched on the whole controversy of having school resource officers report to the superintendent, and that kind of covers things up instead of going to the actual department with police reports. If you want, we can start the next segment by discussing that. I know we only have 50 seconds, but if you want to kind of touch on that a little bit, what's your stance on working with the districts to improve that?
Yeah, I could probably do that in the amount of time we have left. I think that it is a concern with the school resource officers reporting to the superintendent that they do have an incentive to cover, or not necessarily to cover it up, but they don't want that issue rising to the top because that's going to affect their job and things like that. So I do think that it's certainly something we should consider and look at, that these school resource officers should be reporting to a police department, and probably more specifically a sheriff's department, where the sheriff is an elected official, that if he's not addressing these things and doing a good job, he can be voted out of office.
Yeah. So stick with us for the next segment. We're interviewing Brandon Hall, the Republican nominee for State Board of Education, here to represent District 11. God bless you. Stick with us. Be right back.
Here's important new information from the Diabetes Solution Center for you, a family member, or a loved one suffering with diabetes. If you have lost your provider, or if you need a provider for diabetic supplies, you may qualify to receive your diabetic testing supplies now with little or no out-of-pocket cost, regardless of your age. All you need is Medicare or private insurance to be potentially eligible. Call the Diabetes Solution Center right now for details. Just takes a couple of minutes. Our friendly, knowledgeable agents will give you free, no-obligation information, handle all the insurance paperwork, and make sure your supplies are delivered directly to your door for free.
Call U.S. Medical Supply 24 hours a day. 800-597-9323. 800-597-9323. 800-597-9323. Call right now. 800-597-9323.
Let's be honest, wheelchairs are heavy, bulky, and ugly. Introducing the Feather Chair Wheelchair. Order yours today and get a free wheelchair case, a $50 value. The world's lightest wheelchair is just $4.99 with easy payments as low as $16 a month. Sorry, no Medicare or insurance accepted. So call right now to order yours.
800-823-5826. That's 800-823-5826.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395.
You're listening to Joco Community Radio.
Well, good afternoon, Johnson County. Welcome back to Let Freedom Ring. I'm your host, Jake Wernette. Before we get back to the second segment, I'd like to say that Joco Community Radio is a proud member of EMG, a radio and podcast collective proudly serving communities like Johnson and Tarrant County, Texas. We are live 365 on the TuneIn Radio Network and on our station app, which I highly recommend. Check out our lineup and more at tuneinjoco.com. We thank all of our valued partners in helping us amplify the voices of our communities. You heard the commercials. Be sure to connect with Todd Hurd & Associates, attorney at law. Use code JOCO2024 for 25% off your first order at thetiffy.com. And join the Swipe Nation today and save on your credit card processing at swipenationusa.com. Locally owned and operated. Reach out to Tiffany at jo.co at jococommunityradio.com. for advertising rates as low as $50 a month. We also want to thank Lone Star Patriots for sponsoring this show and allowing us to spread the voice of both our elected officials and of our citizens to the broader populace, being able to educate and inform one voter at a time. A conservative grassroots movement here locally that does a lot of good things for the community and propels conservative values forward in our community. So we're back with Brandon Hall, who is the Republican nominee for State Board of Education here in District 11. And once again, I want to thank you for joining on today, Brandon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We kind of ended off the last segment on the school resource officer issue, kind of covering up bullying and stuff like that. Getting back into the questions here, another voter asks, I'm sure you know there are a lot of controversies going on with state officials. There's been stuff with Ken Paxton, the lawsuits, Dade Phelan, and stuff like that. Um, Somebody had expressed they're not really quick to trusting, establishment types or people that they deem establishment in the state government. Um, One of which I don't know what this person had against him, but the commissioner of education being tied to special interests. Um, being promoting special interest in the educational establishment in Texas, where them and their buddies insert poor curriculum and nobody to hold them accountable. They ask, "Do you work for Austin special interests or anyone from the commissioner circle, or are you accountable to the voters?" Which,
So only the voters. That's a great question. And, I would throw back in there, even though this kind of doesn't benefit me, but I would say if you're hesitant to trust politicians, you should be. You should never
yeah,
necessarily trust a politician. You should hold them accountable and look at their record, look at what they're doing for you in office. And that's the problem with politicians too often is it's more, they say one thing to get elected. They say one thing when they're at conservative political meeting, and then they do another thing in Austin. So
yeah,
I would say pretty much ignore what politicians say. And that would even include me, and pay more attention to our record and how we vote. As far as the commissioner goes, I honestly do not know the commissioner at all. He called to congratulate me after I got elected, but that's the only couple
yeah,
minute conversation we've had. I don't know anybody from his circle. And I know the TEA and the SBOE are two separate entities, right? And so the TEA is a bureaucracy, and
yeah.
the SBOE is accountable to the voters. And the voters sent me there, and that's who I'm going to represent is my constituents, not any bureaucrat in Austin. In fact, that's the exact thing that I'm going, and I'm not saying this about the commissioner specifically, not knowing him well and things like that. But the exact thing that I ran against was the
Yeah.
establishment in Austin and the bureaucracy. And I think that's the problem. I think that's why we're ranked 40th in education, is too much bureaucracy and too much of the establishment. And so I think we needed a fresh voice. And that's why I ran. That's what I'll be. I ran to be a fighter, and I'm not going to make friends or kick back. I'm going to really go to war with these woke special interests and see how we can get our education system back on track to give our kids the education they deserve.
So I'm sure vouchers and school choice is a big thing. Um, One parent had written, they said, with vouchers being a big deal, as well as other things like school choice, one of your tenants that you had mentioned was along the lines of universal or something about universal school choice. Do you think those types of bills empower the state over parental choice through strings attached bills on homeschooling or private academies? Um, what is your thoughts on that?
So, when it comes to universal school choice, I support it. And I think that if you're looking at, if you're a small government conservative like I
Yeah.
am, it is not small government conservative for the government to have the monopoly on the education system and all of the funding, right? And so, I believe that the funding should follow the students. I think that, we were just talking about before we came on the show for the listeners, how you graduated, here in Burleson.
Yeah.
And you have to realize a lot of our schools, schools vary, right? Like schools in Houston are different than schools in Burleson
Yeah.
and Cleburne. And so I think we have a lot of great schools. And I think that, so many of our schools are not going to lose that many students because they do a good job. They're popular in the community. Parents like them. And so, but I think that parents should be able to make those choices. And I talked about, earlier on in the show, how I've seen it be life changing in the life of a child when they get put in a good, uplifting environment. Also, we have to realize that public school is not the right fit for every single student,
Yeah.
right? Maybe even most students, but definitely not all. And so no one way of learning is always going to be the right fit. Each student has a different way of learning. And I
Yeah.
think the people who know that best are parents. And so that's why I really want to put them in the driver's seat there. Now, I share the concern that many people do. And so I started in public school at Springtown Elementary. And then, my mom at a certain point pulled me out in elementary school, and I wound up graduating as a homeschool graduate. So I share the concern that there would ever be any strings attached to a school choice bill. Right. And so I think there's a couple ways of addressing that. First, it's we pass a clean bill with no strings attached. So there's no standardized testing, nothing like that. Basically, we're funding students, and we're putting that in the hands of parents, and they can choose where to send those students. And the parents can also hold those private schools or charter schools accountable, and they can decide what's best for their children if they choose, maybe homeschooling or something like that. So it's making sure that there are no strings attached in that bill. That's the first and foremost thing. Secondly, it's an opt-in system. So, I think that I would be concerned as well if I were a parent homeschooling that, maybe they pass a bill with no strings attached for the education savings account and you accept that funding, but then say 10 years down the road, the Democrats come in and take over the legislature and start attaching strings to that money.
Yeah.
I'd be concerned about that too. I think that we always have to be skeptical of the government, right? As conservatives, that's what we believe, hold them accountable and never completely trust, government money. I think that's smart. And so I don't even know that I would accept the education savings account if I was a homeschooler. And so I think it's giving them the freedom and the ability, which all the legislation that's been proposed has been an opt-in system.
Yeah.
So if you're a homeschool family, you can say, no, we don't want strings attached, so we're not going to take the education savings accounts. That's totally your right to do that. If you're a private school, you should have the right not to opt into the system and accept ESAs as well if you're concerned about that. And so I think that's a couple ways of addressing it. But what school choice will do is, again, empower the parents and put them in the driver's seat. And I think students are really going to thrive for that.
Which, I've noticed there are kind of two types of folks that I have met so far. It's, and they definitely respect people for the whole. They want the money to follow the student. I personally, my belief is that if tax breaks were given to the parents, per se, the equal amount that you pay in property tax to the district, you are exempt, kind of like the homestead amendment that they had passed, I think, last year in the constitutional amendment. Do you fall into that category? Like, should we give exemptions to people who qualify for homeschool status or academy status and let them keep the money to use? Or the ESAs were another big way, kind of the property taxes are going to get taken up anyway. Some people believe that it would be too difficult to kind of balance who gets it back and who doesn't. So, the savings account is another opportunity to go. Where do you kind of fall in that? Do you think that we should kind of give tax breaks to the parents, or, should we kind of make it an opt-in system through the state?
So I think the tax break idea is actually, it's a pretty good idea. The only drawback with the tax break is like, how long does that tax break go for? So do you wind up getting all of your money's worth for a lifetime? Because the thing is about parents who choose to opt out of the public school system, we're going to continue to pay those property and school taxes the rest of their life, right? Even through retirement. And so it's not just while they have kids in school. I mean, I think if that were like, a starting place for school choice, I would definitely support it. And in principle, I think it's a really good idea. I think it would just have to be, it wouldn't just be for the time that the child's in school, because that parent's going to pay, into the education system a lot longer after that.
For kids that they might not even have in the district.
Yeah. So like an ongoing tax credit, that might be something interesting. I think that's how education savings accounts really does kind of address that, and fully, and it is like, constitutionally, every child in Texas has the right to a free public education. And so we have an education system that, has a tax system attached to it, and parents and everybody pays into that. And so I think that, the education savings accounts is probably a better way to make sure that the money is following the students. And I think that, like I said before, it's just making sure that there's no strings attached there. And I think that's a good way to address it.
Which I think a lot of people too, I've seen the whole, I guess some people take the word universal, the socialists have kind of geared that term away from what might be the original meaning or the good intention. They kind of perverse it over to an idea of redistribution. We have universal health care, universal basic income. I think I want to ask, would you like to clarify for the people that have, maybe a misnomer about the name, or they kind of think, this guy is supporting a lefty idea, what would you say to them to kind of say, this it's not a socialist idea, but we're actually fighting for parents' rights in the schools. If you'd like to clarify that, I think that's kind kind of where the miscommunication is at.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really glad. So I'll explain what universal means, but I'm really glad you asked to clarify that because that is important. And I think that, just going back to people that would say, well, is this really conservative or not? It definitely isn't conservative to say we have this government, education bureaucracy, and no amount of money could ever leave it, and it could never get any smaller, and things like that. I think that's the opposite of conservative. Conservative is, hey, if people like their public schools, they can continue to send their kids to public school. If they think another option would be a better fit for their child, then they can pursue that. That's conservative. That's choice. That's freedom. Universal, just to kind of clarify that the definition there, universal school choice as opposed to, say non-universal school choice is like a lot of, so 31 states in the country have some sort of school choice program.
Yeah.
And, some states, they have a kind of a cap on how many students could qualify. So it's only a certain number. Some states have done just like special needs kids could qualify for that, so they can get into like a better situation for them.
Yeah.
That's, we'll be able to help them more specifically. And so saying universal just means that every student in Texas would qualify for something like this. So when I say I support universal school choice, it's that I believe every student in Texas should have that opportunity to pursue the best educational fit for them, and not just a limited number of students or a certain category.
Yeah. So the next question is, what would you think is the biggest concern for education right now?
I think it's the basics. It's, your reading, writing, arithmetic, science, social studies. I think we're lacking in them. I think our, just overall reading proficiency is going way down. And we're lacking in math and all of those different things. So I think it's getting back to the basics. I think a good way to do that is when we kind of disentangle ourselves to the extent that we are with, the social programs and indoctrination and things like that. That puts a lot of stress on students and parents. And so I think it's, kind of getting some of that out and then really focusing on the fundamentals and the basics of education. I think that the STAR test is also, huge. You could say, what's the biggest issue in education? I think that it's not working for us at all right now. And it's a huge problem for teachers and the students themselves. Puts a lot of stress on them the way it's set up now. And it should be, criteria based standardized testing where if we have standardized testing, it's based on what they've learned throughout the year. And it would be, ideally towards the end of the year. And they're testing on what they've already learned and what the teachers have been teaching. Part of the problem with the STAR test is sometimes it's, or, right now it's really not at the end of the school year completely. So there might be things that the teacher will teach before the end of the school year, but they haven't gotten to yet that are going to be covered on the STAR test. So before the STAR test, they're having to teach to the test, and kind of alter their teaching method. So we definitely need to find an answer to that.
That's kind of the way it was when I was in public school. We were taking pre-calculus, and we were kind of having to take the test before we got through the lessons. And a lot of the stuff that I had scored wrong, even on the AP exam that I had taken, and some of the other college readiness tests, there would be curriculum material that we hadn't even covered in pre-cal.
Yeah.
While we were taking the test, and then I get to class, and a month later, I'm like, gosh, I could have scored so much better on my AP test to qualify out of a college course if I'd have just taken it later when the school might be given a date, or they feel forced into taking it earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, you asked earlier in the interview, some things that I was surprised to learn about in this campaign, and just talking to teachers and parents. And, one thing I already knew was a problem before I started this campaign, but one thing I just heard over and over again also was that the STAR test is a problem. And it's, it's stressing out students. And that's one aspect that I've seen from youth ministry and even from being a pastor, is around STAR test time, these kids are stressed out. And so I think part of it is, we need to find a better way to address that than the STAR test system. It's kind of failing our students and our teachers as well.
And I think, the viewers and listeners can correct me if I'm wrong. I went to the Godly School Board meeting the other night, and I think from the last 2 years that they had done the survey, only 30% of the students were kindergarten ready. They were behind in the reading, they were behind in stuff, and it shocked me just, how much a small town school like Godley, even faring next to a school like Burleson, where only 54 at most percent of the students across the country, I think was the average, are actually literate in math, reading, and social studies, and science is a big concern should be for our elected officials. So what made you decide to run for the State Board of Education? And did you consider any other offices during this cycle?
Yeah, the original race that we actually started in was House District 60. And
Yeah.
so I announced my campaign for House District 60 back in the summer. One of the big issues in the House District 60 race was education and putting parents in charge of education, empowering parents with school choice. So that was an issue that we were very passionate about. We challenged the incumbent State Representative Glenn Rogers in House District 60, who wound up going on to lose his primary. And so we knew that school choice, empowering parents, is popular. And we knew that's what Republican voters wanted. And we weren't getting that represented. And so that was one of the big issues that got me into that race. And then after I got into the race, the previous challenger wound up jumping in as well, Mike Olcott. And, Mike and I really weren't that much different policy wise. Mike supports school choice and he's extremely conservative. And then, back in the summer, going to campaign events for House District 60, I started, attending events also with the incumbent in the race we wound up winning, and just hearing kind of her views on school choice and things like that. And it was like, well, and she had been there for a long time. And it was like, I think we really need, a new voice here. And somebody who does support empowering parents. And so nobody was running in that race. And I just thought, probably a better fit for me and a better opportunity to really advocate for those educational issues that we had been pushing really hard for anyway was in the SBOE race. And so that's why we jumped in. And like I said, I've been passionate about education for a long time, going back to, working with that Christian school. And my wife has an education degree. She's taught in a private Christian school. And so we're both very passionate about those issues. And it's been kind of the biggest issue for us all along.
So, a lot of people have had family and stuff kind of inspire them during the campaigns. We had asked Tim Good and several others who their biggest inspiration or the biggest kind of proponent to pushing them to run was. Campaigning is not an easy thing. There's a lot of slander. There's a lot of name calling that goes into it. There's a lot of kind of dragging people through the mud. Who was your biggest inspiration during the campaign? Was it family? Was it friends, colleagues, or?
I mean, I had a lot of really good inspirations. I mean, I just have to say is definitely my wife, my biggest inspiration by far. And, we've both kind of dedicated our lives to serving the Lord and, saving America and jumping into this fight. And so, and just to see how dedicated she is to that. And that's not, I don't have to do this alone. And so, getting into the race initially, it was a big decision. It was something that I couldn't just do on my own. I had to say like, hey, this is tough. There is a lot of tough aspects to campaigning, like you mentioned. And so are you sure that this is something you want to do? And the biggest thing is we prayed about it. Obviously we talked to God about it and said, like, is this your will? Is this, and we really felt like he laid it on our hearts and the opportunity in our path. And I think that's why I'm here now. I think every leader, is in a position because God allows them to be, and the voters choose them. But that process was difficult. And my wife, the whole, every step, even sometimes when I was like, I don't know if this is, the right thing to do. And she's like, no, we have to, we cannot sit on the sidelines. And just seeing her passion for, serving the Lord and serving our community was very inspiring to me. And of course, my entire family is extremely supportive. And, I have pastor friends that were praying for me throughout, which really, was very encouraging. And so, but through all the highs and lows, my wife was right there by my side, encouraging me. Sometimes I feel like she might've been stronger than I was through some of it. And so that was my biggest inspiration for sure.
So we kind of covered this one. What would your ideal process be to review curriculum and textbooks for public schools? And who would you rely on being the legislature, TEA, or your own experience when you gain office?
So let me just put it this: nobody, I don't care if you've been a teacher for 30 years, you don't rely 100% on your own experience. there are subject matter experts, for each one of these. And
Yeah.
if you're a teacher in a school, you teach history in a school, you're not a subject matter expert in every subject, right? So, part of leadership, of any leadership position, is finding the right people to really come alongside you that are experts that can really help you go through some of this. And, so part of it is your own experience, and then you add to that. And so, I think it's just finding really good, solid, conservative Christian people that can come alongside, me. And the SBOE actually votes on review boards, for each one of the curriculum, and the TEKs that will come alongside you and kind of comb through these things that are subject matter experts. One example would be like David Barton from Wall Builders. I don't know if you're familiar with David Barton.
I've got one of his books at home.
Yeah. So he's a history expert, obviously. So I really hope, plan on reaching out to him, and I'm sure some of the other conservative, he was on the last social studies TEKs review board. Okay. And so back in, I think it was like 2010 or whenever 2012, the last time that the social studies TEKs were reviewed. And so, like people like him, there's solid conservative Christians that are also experts in the subject matter. He's a history subject matter expert. His son, Tim Barton, also works with him there at Wall Builders. So it's finding good, solid people like that to put on those review boards. And that's what the SBOE does all the time. And then it's just also becoming a subject matter expert to a certain, to the extent that you can. And so I plan on fully applying myself to these things, taking the time to comb through them and read through them myself, and being able to rely on, my biblical conservative worldview to be able to bounce these things off and make sure that for whatever the curriculum is, that it's academically rigorous. First of all, it needs to be, up to standards, and that's how we're going to improve our education system. And then that it's free of any kind of agenda or bias.
Which, another thing that I kind of wanted to ask you before we have to end up here. I know there are a lot of groups. Lone Star Patriots is very involved locally, grassroots, with hosting candidate forums after people get into office, kind of bringing them in to have that discussion with the public. I know there are a lot of folks that you've probably met that have organizations that do kind of like parental-based education or homeschooling organizations. Families Engaged, I know, is a big one locally here. They had folks running for school boards and stuff that kind of were for school choice, parental empowerment. There's a few more over in Godly that I had met with the other night. How would you plan on working with different groups that, might be a little skeptical of having somebody new in after Pat Hardy has been in for a while? Do you think that you could address the concerns and kind of be willing to work with folks in those organizations to kind of balance the concerns? Or
yeah, absolutely. I think, it comes down to being accessible to them, obviously. So, and I don't live in Johnson County or Burleson, but Johnson County and Burleson is going to see me a lot, from now going forward. I was out here during the campaign, and I'm going to make sure that I'm accessible. I'm going to make sure that I'm attending events and that I'm out in the community. People, be able to get my phone number, things like that. And then, I think that anybody who's skeptical, obviously when you're a newcomer, into an office, I'm not the incumbent and stuff. So I don't have a record. People, hear what I say, but they don't know exactly what to expect. But I think they're going to see very quickly, that I'm going to prove myself as a solid conservative fighter and somebody who listens to parents and taxpayers and constituents.
Puts the parents before the interests and everything else that is the reason we're seeing the schools become the way that they have.
Yeah. Parents really should be the only, the main interests, parents and taxpayers and constituents.
So with the last 40 seconds, real brief, is there anything that you want to say to the folks having won the nominee for this position? And what do you want to look forward to moving forward from here?
Well, I would say now that we're through the primaries, as Republicans, as conservatives, we're all on the same team, right? And I know there's probably some runoffs to finish up and things like that. But once we get through the primary process, we're on the same team. We're conservatives, we're Republicans. And so I ask you to join with me in this fight. I ask for your prayers, for, your support in this fight. And let's go out there and put parents back in charge and serve our kids right.
Amen. Thank you for joining us today. God bless you. We'll see you Thursday. May the blood of Christ wash over this country. We desperately need it. Thank
Amen.
you.
From Burleson to Venus and Grandview to Godley, this is the voice of Johnson County, Joco Community Radio.
Let's be honest. Wheelchairs are heavy, bulky, and ugly. If you carry a wheelchair in your car to take care of a loved one, you know how hard it is getting